Hello and welcome to People and Profit. This week we're in Lisbon at one of the world's biggest technology conferences, Web Summit. Coming up in the programme, she was once the internet's chief lizard wrangler. We speak to the founder of Mozilla about the fight for online freedom. Keeping the tech giants in line, US Federal Trade Commissioner Terrell McSweeny tells us about privacy and consumer protection in 2017. Plus, who's afraid of a cyber attack? The security firm whose defences are based on the human immune system. My first guest was one of the driving forces behind the open source browser Firefox and has been a constant voice calling for the internet to remain open and accessible to all. Mitchell Baker, you're the executive chairwoman of Mozilla, the co-founder as well. Thank you for speaking to us. I'd like to ask you, first of all, part of Mozilla's mission is to advocate for the public good of the internet. With everything that's happened in the past year, fake news, manipulation of social media, is that a harder battle now than it was before?
Well, actually, the idea of it is an easier discussion now. You know, for many years, people would question, why in the world would you think values should matter to technology? Now, it is much clearer that these topics are real. Exactly how to handle misinformation or manipulation or data gathering and stalking isn't as clear. And those are balances of different sets of values. And so we are experimenting.
And when we talk about an open and accessible internet, what does that mean for you and how is it threatened?
In our first phase, it meant open, meaning not owned by any one organization, and accessible, meaning it's available to all of us. The new ways of interacting with the internet are not currently open and interoperable. So we're working on those as well. And then the second phase, I would say, is really what does open and accessible to all mean? It's much more than access. You know, accessible has to mean a commitment to inclusion, and it has to mean that it's a safe place. You know, open could mean, if we build it wrong, it's a great place for bullies and criminals.
And is there a recognition that those are problems, and are they being tackled by the big names that work in this industry?
I would say that the election in the United States made it clear to technologists that the platforms that have been built in California and Silicon Valley are really being used and manipulated in unintended ways.
The product that perhaps people know Mozilla best for is Firefox, the browser. How do you stay relevant with that browser in a world that's dominated by the likes of Google Chrome?
It's really quite, I would say, encouraging that the mission of Mozilla encourages world-class technical talent to come to Mozilla. And so we've spent the last couple of years taking new technology and revamping Firefox. You know, a decade ago, Chrome had the new technology, and it had some things that we didn't. But come November 14th, when the new Firefox ships, we will have the newest generation of technology, which is really fast. It's very responsive. We've been pushing, AR and VR in an interoperable way, which has high demands on speed and responsiveness. And I think if you try Firefox again, you will see it's a different product. So I hope you'll find that we've succeeded.
For a long time, your title at Mozilla was Chief Lizard Wrangler. Where did that come from?
That came from the very early days, and I still use it sometimes. And it is meant to reflect that Mozilla is more than employees. We have large communities of volunteers that gather, sometimes on their own and acting spontaneously, and sometimes working deep inside of Firefox and our other products and work. And so we wanted to find a title that reflected ultimate authority, thus the chief, but that didn't reflect a management chain. And so we took the sort of dino lizard mascot, and one of the developers came up with an idea of, I think it was Chief Lizard Herder, and it was my husband who has a way for words. He says, Chief Lizard Wrangler, that's the one you want. So there we are.
Just briefly, is the internet in good hands? Are we good custodians of the internet for the future?
I think that's an unknown currently, because we have new questions in this era that we haven't solved yet. So that's up to us to decide.
Okay, Mitchell Baker, Executive Chairwoman of Mozilla, thank you very much for speaking to us. Now, as internet users, we're used to giving up a certain amount of our personal information for the name of convenience. But protecting that information and consumers is part of the mission of the Federal Trade Commission. And I'm joined now by Federal Trade Commissioner Terrell McSweeny. Thank you for speaking to us. Is consumer protection a big enough issue for tech companies like the ones that we're hearing from here at the Web Summit?
I think it's a very important issue. First, offering consumers choices and control over their personal information. And second, making sure that as we live in this very connected environment, information is properly secured. We hear all the time about these very high-profile data breaches of very sensitive personal information. So there's a huge obligation on companies to secure the information they're collecting.
You've spoken before about how you want US companies to do more to protect that personal data. Is that something the Federal Trade Commission can do to help encourage those companies to take the necessary steps?
We are working hard on it at the Federal Trade Commission. We're trying to make sure that consumers are offered clear choices about when their information is being collected and how it's being used. Now, practically speaking, it's a tough job and we're very busy at it. I do think that in America especially it would be helpful for consumers to have even more privacy rights and control over their data. But with the authority that we have, we are using it vigorously to bring cases involving some of these very large tech companies.
One of the debates that's being had a lot here is this issue of privacy versus security. As consumers, do we need to sacrifice our privacy in the name of security or vice versa?
Well, I feel very strongly about this. I don't think we need to give up our privacy in the name of security. Now, I do think we have to make compromises in a highly connected world that we live in a digital economy. And there are situations in which we may need to give up some privacy in order to make sure that we're all collectively secure. However, I think it's fundamentally important that we hang on to privacy and advocate for it as much as possible, because it's essential not just for our own autonomy and individual identities, but also for democracy, for thought, for speech. And in fact, privacy is a very good security measure. So privacy in the form of data minimization or stronger encryption tool or blockchain can be a very, very effective way of preserving our own privacy in a highly connected economy.
What's the biggest challenge facing consumers online at the moment? What's the biggest danger out there for them?
I think the biggest danger is that it's very hard for us as individual consumers to know what is happening to our data once we decide to share it. All of us are very used to taking advantage of the modern conveniences that involve some exchange of information, and very often that is a very useful and important tool in our daily lives. Think about using a mapping app or hailing a ride. These things can be very, very helpful. The biggest challenge, though, is it's very hard to know once we relinquish that information, especially if it's going to be shared beyond the company that we're transacting with, what is going to happen to it, and then to anticipate the consequences in our daily lives of the sharing of that information. Of course, there are very sad instances in which information is also then breached and made public or made available to the bad guys on the internet, and that's an unfortunate consequence for consumers as well.
Terrell McSweeny, Federal Trade Commissioner, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thanks for having me.
This year's WannaCry ransomware attack put cybersecurity back at the top of the global agenda. Bigger attacks need better defences, and that's the domain of the cybersecurity firm Darktrace, and I'm joined now by its chief executive, Nicole Eagan. Nicole, thanks for being with us. WannaCry for many people was that wake-up call in terms of cybersecurity. What have we learned since then in terms of the defences that we need?
Well, I think the thing we mainly learned from WannaCry is it moves so quickly and spread so fast that our human security teams just couldn't keep up. So I think the big takeaway is we're going to have automation and probably some reliance on things like artificial intelligence to help on the defense side.
Now, your defenses, you have one that's modeled on the human immune system. How does that work?
Well, when you think about the human immune system, we have skin, and that keeps most of the time, it keeps us safe, but eventually some bacteria, some virus may get inside. And we have this very precise response. And that's exactly how Darktrace works. It actually uses artificial intelligence to understand what's normal and what's not normal inside our company's network. And when something's not normal, it basically has an automatic response. It can slow down the attack, for example, until the human team can catch up.
Here at the Web Summit, we've heard the idea of warnings about artificial intelligence and the risks that it poses. Is your technology an example of good artificial intelligence?
You know, there's really two different types of artificial intelligence, and for better or worse, they get blurred together quite often. So one is there's something called broad AI. Broad AI is when you're trying to actually get the machines or robots to think and feel like human beings. That's not what Darktrace does. We're in the camp of what's called narrow AI, and narrow AI is very different. It's trying to set out to solve a very specific problem. Now, in our case, some days it feels like an unsolvable problem, but it is the whole area of cyber attacks and unknown threats.
How close are we to a major cyber attack that we could see greater damage done than even what we saw with WannaCry, for example?
Well, I think what we're starting to see is we saw actually a warning back in early October in the US about national critical infrastructure, things like energy plants, water supply, transportation systems. We subsequently saw about 9 days ago a similar type of warning from the EU as well. So I think that's very concerning because that's where physical security combines with digital infrastructure. So I think those are the types of attacks. And luckily what we're seeing today is more so nation states being curious, and they're staying inside networks and going as undetected for as long as they possibly can to watch and learn. What we don't know is how information like that would be used in the future.
Is the defense technology keeping up with the cyber attackers?
So I think what we did have was legacy technology that was not keeping up with the attacks, and there's a simple reason why that was happening. First was they were trying to keep the bad guys out. And the reality is our firewalls, our networks are so porous today, there is no such thing as keeping the bad guys out. The second thing is we give credentials and access to so many people, right? So it could be an inside attack, it could be a human error. But also what we're going to see, I think, in the future is this artificial intelligence. We haven't even seen the attacks yet use AI itself as part of the attack vector. We all have to be prepared for when that day happens.
Nicole Eagan, CEO of Darktrace, thank you very much for speaking to us. And that's it from us at the Web Summit. Don't forget you can see more of our coverage online, and you can also contact us on social media too. Until next time, thanks for watching.